Okay, so we are getting into chapter 13, which goes over the spinal cord as well as the spinal nerves and the reflexes. And we introduced the reflexes a little bit the other day in class, having you guys go through the reflex lab and just being able to visually see a reflex response. So starting on your packet, the bottom of the first page, it talks about spinal reflexes, which I already introduced, are just automatic nerve responses that you guys have in response to a particular stimuli that comes into the body. And this is going to perform survival functions. It's also going to perform just your day-to-day routine reflexes that you need to have in order to maintain posture, balance, and things of that nature. When you guys stand upright, you feel like you're pretty sturdy standing upright if you're talking to somebody else. But in actuality, it is a constant balance system of your muscles and your nerves having to reflex and respond to each other to keep you from tipping over. And your nerves and muscles have become so good at it that you don't even realize it's happening. But literally every time that you guys are standing upright, it is a constant battle in order to keep you in that position and make sure that you don't fall over. Likewise, when you guys even sit in a chair, just to keep you upright and again prevent you from falling over to the side and falling out of your chair, that is a constant monitoring system that your nerves have to keep up with in order to make sure that you don't shift too far to one side and fall over. So your brain and your nerves do it so quickly and so rapidly you don't even realize it's being done for you, but it's a pretty amazing feat in order to keep you in the upright position. Looking at the spinal cord itself, the spinal cord is about the size of your pinky finger. So it talks about being a 1/2 inch wide, but if you just look at your pinky finger, that is the average size of your spinal cord. It does vary at a couple locations, and especially when you get down to the lower end, it begins to taper and become smaller. So keep in mind that that is an average. And within your vertebral column, the spinal cord is actually going to begin to taper and change right about L1 and L2. So that first and second lumbar vertebrae is going to be where you're going to notice a transition or a change in the spinal cord itself. Now, most people think of the spinal cord as being a whole one-piece structure, and as I failed miserably the other day to draw on the board, your spinal cord is actually almost divided into two. You have what is known as a sulcus and a fissure on the front and the back side of your spinal cord, and they're actually very deep grooves that you have in the spinal cord itself that, like I said, nearly sever it into two pieces. So you have the posterior median sulcus. Posterior tells you that it's on the back side. Sulcus tells you that it's a groove. It's more shallow compared to a fissure, but it is a deep groove or depression that you have within the spinal cord itself. And then you have the anterior median fissure. This is going to be on the front side of the spinal cord. Fissures, like I said, are going to delve a little deeper into the spinal cord compared to a sulcus, but both of them are going to cause these indentations in the front and the back side of the spinal cord. Flip over to the following page. It talks about enlargements that you guys have in the spinal cord. The first one is the cervical enlargement, and this is going to be right about your mid-back, a little higher position between your shoulder blades. And what you have is you have a bundle of ganglia. So you just have a bunch of cell bodies that are all packed together. And so when you look at the spinal cord here, you're going to notice that it looks like there's a bulge in that portion of the spinal cord. And this is where you have a higher abundance of nerves in that location because they are going to be serving all the way down to your fingertips. So these are the nerves that are going to branch off of the spinal cord, work your chest region, down your arm, all the way down to your fingertips. And so you have to have a little bit more of those nerve cell bodies packed in there in order to be able to accommodate all the functions for your upper body. Likewise, you have another enlargement in the lumbar region, and this is because these are going to be the nerves that are going to feed the legs. And so again, you have to have a higher abundance of nerves packed into that area because this is where the nerves are going to branch off of the spinal cord, run down your legs all the way down to your toes. Looking at the spinal cord itself, the gross anatomy of the spinal cord, as I mentioned, it changes and transitions as you move from the brain down to the sacrum, where your spinal cord will eventually end. You have the first structure, which is known as the conus medullaris. This is going to be a portion of the spinal cord where you are first going to see the spinal cord begin to taper. So this is the first point or the location where you're going to notice a narrowing of the spinal cord compared to everything from that point and above. Then you have the filum terminale. This is literally what it means is the spinal cord is terminating. This is where the spinal cord ends. And then you have the cauda equina. And the literal meaning of cauda equina is horse's tail. And when you get into that L1, L2, the spinal cord not only begins to taper, but it also begins to fray. And so instead of having the spinal cord bundled as a single unit, you tend to get these, or you do get these individual strands of the spinal cord as they make their way down through the sacrum. It looks like the strands of hair that you would have if you have a ponytail. They referred to it as a horse's tail, and so that's what cauda equina means, is horse's tail. The pictures that you have, I know that they're on the small side, but it shows you where the cervical enlargement is, it shows you where the lumbar enlargement is, where the conus medullaris would start, the cauda equina, and then it shows you at the very tip of the sacrum where you have the filum terminale. Now, as you move down the spinal cord, you have a pair of nerves that is going to leave at each of the vertebrae. So you spinal cord running down the middle of those bones, and then every so often you have a pair of nerves that branches off and serves that region of the body. So if they branch off at the neck, they're going to serve the neck. If they branch off in the thoracic region, they're going to serve the chest. If they branch off in the lumbar region, they take care of the lower body as well as the legs. So it shows you C1 through C8, T1 through T12, L1 through L5, and it's showing you where all of those spinal nerves branch off of the spinal cord and then would run and go out to the different parts of the body. The only thing that I hate about these pictures is that it looks like they only go about a half an inch or so and then the nerves stop. Please understand that these are going to spread throughout your entire body. They would run all the way down your arms, all the way down your legs. They're going to wrap around from your spinal cord around to the front of your body and serve the front of your body as well. And so the picture doesn't really do it justice as to what the spinal nerves actually look like as they branch off the spinal cord itself. Move over to the next page. It talks about spinal cord segments. With the spinal cord segments, it's simply referencing where the spinal nerves are going to originate from. And so much like you would have the cervical region, the thoracic region, the lumbar region of the vertebrae when we went through the skeletal system, you have that same sort of setup when we talk about the spinal cord itself. Parts of the spinal cord. You have what is known as the dorsal root ganglia. And basically, dorsal is telling you the position or the side of the body that it's on. And then ganglia is telling you that you have a collection of these cell bodies that are working together in order to perform a job. So when it talks about the dorsal root ganglia, it's actually referring to the portion of the nerve that is going to branch off of the backside of the spinal cord. So dorsal tells you backside. Now, the important thing to understand about the dorsal root ganglia is that this particular nerve is going to be responsible for taking sensory information into the spinal cord. So information comes into the spinal cord in a certain location and it exits the spinal cord in another location. The sensory information that your body picks up, so cold air hits your body, that information goes up to your brain. As it's making its way from the nerves to the spinal cord on its way up to the brain, it's actually only going to be able to allowed to enter the spinal cord from the back side. So that is what the dorsal root is going to be responsible for dealing with. If you move down to the bottom of the page, it shows you a cross-section of the spinal cord. And so this would be if you would cut the spinal cord and are looking at it from the top. You'll notice it indicates where the white matter is, and that is to the outside. And then you have the gray matter, which is at the core of the spinal cord. The gray matter is responsible for processing sensory information. And so you have that at the middle there. It kind of looks like a butterfly. Sometimes that's the way that it is described, as having a butterfly type shape to it. You also can see where the dorsal root ganglion comes into the spinal cord, and then you also have the ventral root, which ventral tells you that it's coming out of the front side of the spinal cord. Now, the ventral root is going to be responsible for, or is going to be made up of motor neurons. And so start piecing the information together that we've talked about. We've talked about sensory, we've talked about motor neurons. Sensory neurons bring information to the brain and the spinal cord. Inner neurons process the information in the brain and the spinal cord. And then the motor neurons are actually going to carry out the response that was formed. So that ventral root is going to be linked to those motor neurons, which are actually going to carry out the particular response. When we talk about the spinal nerves, just keep in mind that all of the spinal nerves, there's a total of 31 sets of spinal nerves that will branch off of the spinal cord, and all of them have pairs. So you have one coming off the right and one coming off the left side of the spinal cord itself. Okay. It also talks about mixed nerves, and mixed nerves have the ability to carry both afferent and efferent information. So they can bring information into as well as out of a particular nerve fiber. And then the last image that you have on that particular page shows you all of the layers that you have on the spinal cord. You can see the bone wrapping around the spinal cord. You can see the spinal nerves that are branching off, exiting through the foramen of those bones. And then you have a bunch of skin layers before you actually get down to the spinal cord itself. If you flip over to the next page, it starts to get into those different skin layers that you guys have around the spinal cord. There are three different, they're called Meninge layers, and the Meninge layers are going to surround the spinal cord. They are going to help protect the spinal cord, and they also help hold cerebral spinal fluid to the spinal cord so that it can continue to get the nutrients that it needs, as well as keep the ion levels where they need to be, so that the brain and the spinal cord can function the way that they need to. Now, the outermost layer is known as the dura mater. The middle layer is known as the arachnoid mater, and then you have the inner layer, which is known as the pia mater. The pia mater is going to also be the membrane layer that is going to be part of that filum terminale. So when the spinal cord actually terminates, the material that makes up that part of the spinal cord, it's no longer true spinal cord. It doesn't have the bundles of neurons like we see throughout the rest of the spinal cord. You basically have this Meninge layer. And so that membrane layer that makes up the filum terminale is actually the pia mater. Now, for the three different types of Meninge layers that you guys have, the dura mater, being the outermost, is a very tough membrane that is made up of several different strands of fibrous, made up of a fibrous type of connective tissue. With the